2020 Cybersecurity Assistance Program. Before we get going this morning, I have a couple housekeeping announcements. We did begin promptly here at a 1 minute past 11 o'clock. We will end at 12 promptly as well. Also want to let everybody know that this is being recorded, okay? And this second part of the webinar series can be viewed at a later time at newyorkmep.org. And then finally, questions are happily accepted throughout the entire presentation this morning up until the end. And if you can please put any questions that you may have throughout the entire presentation for the speakers into the question section that hopefully you can see in your control panel. Next slide. Again, good morning. My name is Corey Albrecht, and I am the Center Director at Mohawk Valley Community College's Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. AIM is a New York State MEP center representing the 6 counties in the Mohawk Valley region. As you can see, my contact information is below my name and picture. If at any time, if you have any questions about any of the presentations or the grant program, New York State 2020 Cybersecurity Assistance Program, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Next slide. Okay, so what is the New York State Cybersecurity Assistance Program? Okay, so this is a grant program. It was awarded to Mohawk Valley Community College in May of this year, and it will work into next year as well. So it expires on September 30th of 2021. We have 3 main grant tasks or objectives which we have to accomplish. Task number 1 is to establish a marketing and an outreach plan with Empire State Development, which includes leveraging regional assets across the state and coordinating outreach to maximize potential company assistance. A minimum of 5 webinars to introduce the program and to highlight the DFARs requirement. Okay, and again, as I stated previously, this is webinar number 2 of the 5-part webinar series. Next slide. The second main task or objective is to plan and execute webinars and workshops for New York State defense companies to introduce the assistance program and answer questions regarding cybersecurity needs and regulations. These webinars and workshops will train companies to perform a NIST SP 800-171 cybersecurity self-assessment and to determine if they need additional resources to help perform the assessment and potential follow-on remediations. At the end of the webinars and the workshops, the trainees will have the option to take a self-assessment. A minimum of 250 Department of Defense companies will be engaged through either workshops or webinars. And then the final task objective is to assist companies that do not have the financial resources or the staff available to perform the assessment. At least 67 defense-related companies will be assisted with these assessments by one of our implementation teams. Next slide, please. And then, like all successful grants, it's not made possible without the great partners that we have across the state of New York. Empire State Development is the origin of this grant fund, and as I stated at that time, it was awarded to Mohawk Valley Community College and our New York State MEP Center, AIM. And then also presenting this morning, we have one of our great partners in a Fuse Hub and implementation team members, Twin State Technologies and MTech, which is the MEP Center in the Hudson Valley region. Next slide. At this time, I would like to introduce and turn the program over to Everton. Everton is the New York State MEP Solutions Director for Fuse Hub. So with that, take it away, Everton.
Thank you, Corey. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. So this is the second webinar of the 5-part series. And as Corey mentioned to you, this grant entails 3 tasks. Today, I'm going to talk to you as to how we plan on implementing this. And the first task is going to introduce the concept of the cohort. Have the next slide, please. And so we designed this concept as a way of being able to put together a family of companies, and these are going to be manufacturers in the DoD supply chain. And it has a no-cost membership component, so all members will be able to join for free. The cohort, we anticipate, will consist of 320 manufacturers from the DoD supply chain. What we hope to do is to give them access to resources that we have within the state and allow them to do statewide networking, which I think will be a benefit to all the companies associated with the DoD contracts they have. Next slide, please. So what does this manufacturing cohort, what does the program consist of, and what benefits do we have? So the first thing, of course, is the membership that I mentioned in the DoD manufacturing cohort. But we plan to do a 5-part webinar series on cybersecurity. And as I mentioned before, this is the second one. We have 3 more to come. And in addition to that, we plan to do an interactive session. It's a training session, a course that can be taken online that will teach the cohort members how to meet the NIST 800-171 requirements. And this is really an important part of it, because all 320 members will have the opportunity at the end of this program to go through this teachable program and be able to do their own self-assessment. We will then provide completion certificates for the companies involved. And in addition to that, we'll be offering financial assistance to manufacturers with financial and staff restraints to conduct assessments to meet DoD compliance. And these will be personalized assessments. So what's the objective here? We hope that by April of next year, April 2021, to enroll 320 DoD supply chain manufacturers so that the cohort is complete and have them complete this online training program. In addition, from those 320 cohort members, we plan to conduct 6 to 7 physical personalized assessments. And there will be a cost to this, of course, but the grant provides $6,000 to each company that is awarded of that 6 to 7. So could I have the next slide, please? So how will this online self-paced training work? So we'll have 9 modules in the online teachable platform. That's a platform we'll be using that's embedded here at Mohawk Valley Community College. And this platform will cover the 14 security families as described in NIST SP 800-171. After we complete these modules, there'll be a training or test, I would say, not really, maybe not a test, probably a little quiz, but there will be an assessment to see what you've learned. And the whole objective here is to ensure that our cohort members become full versed with the, with the NIST 800-171. And at the end of that, we will give a certificate at the conclusion of the final module. Now, I won't be going through all 14 families here. I have them on the screen, but I'm sure if you join the cohort, you'll be able to go through that, and I heartily encourage you to do so. You have the next slide, please. So the 5-part webinar series, as I mentioned before, we did one on September 22nd, which was an intro to cybersecurity. Today, we're doing the industry standard requirement. And we have 3 more to go, which will be on November 24th, with the enemies and attacks. And December 15th, we'll be doing one called the threat at home. And in January 26th to be exact, we'll be doing the general advice and pointers seminar. So speaking about that, the gentleman who will be continuing the rest of this and who will be very, very instrumental in the presentation of all these seminars is none other than Mr. Paul Laporte. He's the coordinator of cybersecurity at Mohawk Valley Community College of AIM. So take it away, Paul.
Helps if you unmute your microphone. There we go. Okay, thank you very much, Everton. My name is Paul Laporte. I am the cybersecurity coordinator for the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. Thank you all for joining me here on what is still this morning, right? Okay, so I am the cybersecurity coordinator for AIM, and I have been doing cybersecurity assessments for small and medium manufacturers since 2016, and a very large portion of what I do has to do specifically with the requirements of the Department of Defense and other DoD-related entities in making sure that companies are doing their due diligence to meet their cybersecurity contracts and any other manufacturing contracts that they might be producing. So moving on to the next slide here, turning my webcam back on. So when I talk about cybersecurity, I do want to always stress that the first thing that you should be thinking about, and the thing that should be the most importance to you as far as cybersecurity goes, is ensuring the longevity and the sustainability of your company. You know, that is really the reason that you should be focused on cybersecurity primarily. But with that being said, one of the things that you also have to worry about is making sure that you're meeting the proper standards and requirements that are being asked of you by the people that you're either trying to do business with or the people that you're doing business with currently. So this could be in existing contracts or on new contracts that you are trying to bid on. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of those standards and requirements and break them down a little bit more for those of you who haven't had a lot of experience with them previously. Before I do that though, we're going to pop up a quick poll question here like we like to do at the beginning of these webinars. And the question that we're going to ask to start this off and kind of get everybody interacting with the presentation is, have you been asked by any of your clients to meet any industry requirements? And I'll give you guys a few seconds to go ahead and answer that. Give about 30 seconds and wait for those replies. Okay, and now we've gone ahead and closed the polling. So Corey, if you could just let me know the results of that poll. I do not have the ability to see that currently.
Sure, Paul. We have 68% of the registrants answered yes, and 32% answered no.
Okay, so about 2/3 of you have been asked about it. The 1/3 who hasn't, honestly, you should consider yourselves a little lucky. Because this has actually been something that has been asked of manufacturers really since 2015, but they've really started to enforce it more in 2017 and going forward. So if you haven't been asked yet, that's fortunate for you, but you should certainly still consider what you're going to do to prepare for the day that will come when you are asked about these things. So starting off with the big one that is currently the gold standard for DoD related contracts, and that is the NIST 800-171. So NIST stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and they provide data information and guidance on a wide variety of scientific and technological subjects. So they are not just purely an IT related body or a cybersecurity related body. They provide guidance on a wide swath of things that go all across science, data, a lot of different things. They pop up in a lot of different areas, but the one that we're worried about is the NIST 800-171. So this is a specific document that provides guidance for protecting CUI in non-federal systems. And CUI stands for Controlled Unclassified Information. And the best way that that can be described is that controlled unclassified information is information that the Department of Defense does not want publicly available, but they're not putting any sort of official classification on there. They're not making it classified, so you need to have some sort of clarification from the government to actually be able to view it. If you're looking for more information on controlled unclassified information, including what it is, what it isn't, what CUI markings might look like, the link provided here is archives.gov/CUI. There's a really great repository of information there that you can get find out whatever you're looking for in terms of CUI. Now, it is worth noting that the 800-171, the document that we're going to be discussing to start off with, it's not a certification standard, but it's a set of guidelines. So for those of you in manufacturing, you're probably very aware and familiar with things like ISO certifications, AS9100, things like that. These are things you actually have to have an auditor come in and do and certify you in. The 800-171 is not that. It is just simply a set of guidelines that the Department of Defense has adopted for their manufacturers in making sure that they are doing their due diligence to protect the CUI information that they are looking to have secured. Now, the 800-171 is divided up into 14 different families, and Everton had them on a previous slide, but I've gone ahead and outlined them here again. And if you take a look at these, they kind of span the gamut. They aren't just IT related families. They're not just IT related controls. We have things regarding policies, awareness and training, personnel security, physical security, protection of media. So the 800-171 is making sure that you are securing this information, not just in the digital world on our computers, but also in the physical space as well, and making sure that there are proper rules and policies put in place at individual companies to ensure that the employees know how to handle this information with the responsibility that it deserves. So this is really what it breaks out into. There's 110 different items within these 14 families, which is a pretty comprehensive list, but there is a lot of overlap in terms of if you're meeting one specific rule, you might be meeting a few more throughout the document. So even though it's 110 items, it's not as daunting as it might seem just by looking at that number. Now, the 800-171 guidance applies to DFARS clause 252.204-7012. So if you have this clause in your existing contracts, or you see this clause appear in any new contracts you might be bidding on, this is the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement clause, that requires you to handle CUI according to the NIST 800-171 guidelines. And the mechanism that they're using for making sure that manufacturers are in fact doing that is, as of this moment, a self-assessment of their systems by the holder or applicant of the contract. So again, they're not sending anybody out to perform assessments. They are leaving the manufacturers to self-assess and using really kind of an honor system to make sure that they are handling this information properly. And again, if you're not and you say you are, there's obviously going to be some ramifications for that. But they don't have the infrastructure because the supply chain of the DoD is so huge and it spans so many small companies. They just don't have that infrastructure to ensure that everybody at present time is meeting these requirements. So it is self-assessed. Now, what a manufacturer is going to need to attest to their meeting the 800-171 requirements are two things. The first is a system security plan, or SSP, as you might hear it referred to in abbreviation in other presentations, or when other members of the Department of Defense or manufacturers in the supply chain talk about it. The system security plan provides an outline of the manufacturer's current security practices and procedures in place by a company for review. So this is what you would have in place for the 800-171 requirements, those 110 items that you are currently meeting. So if you go through and do your assessment, whether it is self-assessed or through an outside organization, which we'll discuss a little later on, and they find that there are a number of things that you are doing correctly, that you are compliant with certain areas of the 800-171. Those items would go in your system security plan and be documented, so when you are submitting your proof to meeting the DFARS clause, they would be included in that. The second part of this is a plan of action with milestones, or a POAM, and this provides an outline of security practices and policies that are in need of remediation and apply to the 800-171 requirements that are currently not being met. So the nice thing about this DFARS clause is that it does not require you to meet all 110 requirements up front of the 800-171. The Department of Defense understands that companies are going to be at different levels of ability, different sizes, different types of resource caches. They understand that not everybody is going to be able to meet these guidelines right away when they're looking to bid for a DoD contract or just start to move into that space. So the concession that they've made is that in addition to the system security plan showing what you're doing, you have a plan of action with milestones showing what you need to work on. And that plan of action is going to need to require details on the remediation steps as well as the timelines. So if you discover that you need to upgrade some systems because they're running on an out-of-date operating system like Windows 7 or older, you can put in this plan of action, okay, we are planning on replacing the operating systems. If there's multiple steps in that process, so say you need to replace the computers first, then purchase the software, then install the software, you can outline those steps and then have a timeline in place for each of those steps being met. So if you put down in that plan what you're doing, when you're planning on doing it, as long as it's within reason and not extremely far into the future, like 10 years or so, then that is what is going to satisfy your DFARS clause in addition to that system security plan. Now, the current cybersecurity assessment process can be done a couple different ways. So as I mentioned earlier, it is only required that you self-assess. You can go through this process yourself if you are a company with the appropriate staff and resources. So if you are somebody who has a full-time IT staff on hand, or you have a relationship with your IT contractor where they can go through this assessment process for you, then you can go ahead and go through that assessment process on your own. Now, one of the things that we are providing to assist people with that, as Everton mentioned earlier, as part of the Cybersecurity Assistance Grant cohort, we are providing a no-cost online self-assessment course for you that I am the instructor on, and it will essentially take you step by step through each of those areas of the 800-171 and discuss what they're looking for and what you'll need to have in place to be compliant with those. That is available currently. We have the introductory module and the module for the first family, which actually covers a fifth of the 800-171 requirements. So if you sign up for the cohort and you are looking to do a self-assessment, we have instructional materials for about the first 20% of the 800-171 available immediately. And we're going to be releasing additional modules on a weekly schedule throughout just before Christmas will be when the last one is released. So if you're looking to try this yourself and you want a little bit of guidance, it's a no-cost tool for you. I highly recommend it. Sign up and then you'll get some additional guidance that'll kind of help you along the way. Now, if you're a company that does not have the staff and resources to do this process on your own, you're a very small company, you don't have the extra resources to dedicate to taking the time to do this assessment yourself, you can get a third-party assessment. And third-party assessments are having somebody else come in from the outside and do the assessment for you. So that is really the large bulk of what I do with my work at the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing. I go into a company, I take a look at what they're doing currently, I compare it to the NIST 800-171 requirements, and then I present them with a report stating, okay, here's what you're doing well, here's what you need to do, kind of breaking out in that system security plan and plan of action framework that we discussed earlier. And then the company can then use that to basically roadmap how they're planning on meeting those requirements down the line, and really use it as a way to best dedicate the resources that they have in the most efficient manner possible. And for people who are looking for a third-party assessment, we have funding assistance that's available through the 2020 ESD Cybersecurity Assistance Grant, as Everton mentioned, up to $6,000 towards the cost of the assessment, which is going to cover a very large portion of the actual assessment costs. So again, if you're interested in that, head on over to the Fuse Help website and you'll be able to apply for that. Now, I'd like to take you through just a pretty brief overview and high-level look at what the actual assessment process looks like when I go in and do this for a company, so you can kind of get an idea of what to prepare yourself for. Again, when I do these assessments, it's really more on the ground level. It's really taking a look from a practical perspective, what sort of things you're doing in terms of the overall security of your company. And what we'll start off with is what order we do these steps in has varied a little bit because of the COVID issues. This used to be the first step. Now I usually end up doing it as the second step, but the actual process is the same. So what we do starting off is a physical walkthrough of the company. So we're actually going through the facility itself. We're IDing and documenting each individual device that is connected to the company's network. We're determining the operating environment of the IT devices and how they're being used. This allows us to ask specific questions about the specific devices that may be important to the 800-171. How many different people are using a single device? What's the type of security that's involved in it? What environment is it operating in? Things like that. And then we end that process with an actual overview of the physical site security itself. So how people are accessing the building, what points of entry are open, how close those resources are to those points of entry, how vulnerable the company is to being attacked in the physical space. That is what we will look at in that step one part when we're taking that logistical map of the company. Step 2 is an entire overview of the 800-171 requirement and really kind of an interview process where we're going through each of those 14 sections and 110 different items. Typically, this process has involvement from the IT team throughout the entire overview, and then the human resources department is available as needed to answer any like personnel or policy related questions that the IT department may not be inclined to answer. And what we do is we then take those people involved in the manufacture, we go through and compare their company policies and see where their progress is in meeting the existing requirements, again, in those 14 families that are outlined below, and just see where you currently are. Step 3 of the process is employee interviews. So for larger companies that are above really like 10 people or so, we do this process. If it's a very small company where we're talking less than 10 employees, I kind of end up talking to everybody in the process anyways, so we don't usually do it for them. But anybody who has a larger company, what we'll do is we'll usually select 5 employees for every 50 to 100 IT users. We like to get them from varying departments, varying level of experience with the company, varying level of experience with just IT and computers in general. And we like to get a nice mix of general employees as well as management. And what we do is we ask them the same series of questions to find discrepancies in any policies or potential training that they might have gone through. So maybe one department sees the company's policies one way, another department sees the company's policies a different way. We can find out where those issues might lie in and see what one area might know or believe over another when it comes to the cybersecurity and handling of information at a company. I always stress that these employee interviews that are done are not for disciplinary purposes. We do provide the surveys to the manufacturer at the presentation process, but we don't want to get anybody in trouble. It's really just to make sure that they are aware if any other employees need additional training or if there needs to be focus placed on certain areas over others. And then at the conclusion of this process, we will provide an assessment report with a remediation plan. This will list the issues that were found in the assessment. So the things that were non-compliant or partially compliant, we will outline those specifically. We will also have notes for anything that we felt you were compliant in as well. So you can use that information to help build your system security plan. When we outline these areas, especially the non-compliant and partially compliant ones, we will also give you suggested remediation steps for fixing those areas that you are not currently meeting. And we'll give you a priority listing of those as well. Obviously, anything that you're non-compliant in has to be fixed eventually, but certain things are more important than others. So we have a priority listing. If it's critical, fix it right away. Very high should be fixed within 30 days. High within 60, medium within 90, and low, at the company discretion when they're available to get to it. And then after the report is given, then we do have some follow-up steps. So post-remediation activities that we will assist with. We can work with the company to help develop a plan of action. And then once they have gone through that plan of action writing process, then we can recheck their compliance for 800-171 requirements, looking at different trouble or non-compliant areas that were outlined in the previous assessment. And then we can provide a revised assessment report showing what updated compliance that you have. And if all of the areas of the 800-171 are being met at that time, or there is a plan of action in place for all the areas that we found that were non-compliant or partially compliant, at that time, we can provide you with a completion letter that you can use to help further your case as a presentation of evidence to your DoD contractors that you're actually meeting the DFARS clause. And then companies will use that completion letter as a marketing tool as well, even for non-DoD related business. And that's something that's worth noting, is that I use the 800-171 for all companies I do assessments for, regardless of whether or not they have to meet any sort of industry requirements, because I think it's a good foundation of cybersecurity for a company to have, and it really is the base level that anybody who is doing any sort of major business should start at. So that is the follow-up steps that are provided to you as an additional portion of that assessment project and the cost that you will be paying, and that will help be supplemented by the ESD grant. Now, there are a lot of questions of how this is going to change in the future. There are a lot of different things that have been coming through in recent months. So now I'm going to take some time to break down what compliance is going to mean to companies in the years to come. So the first one is there was recently an interim rule to the DFARs that was released that is set to go into effect on November 30th. And this is DFARS case 2019-D041. If you want to go ahead and search it and look at the whole rule. And basically what it does is it takes the 800-171 self-assessment model and breaks it out into 3 classification requirements: basic, medium, and high. Now, the vast majority of companies are still going to fall under the basic, which is still doing a self-assessment, going through that process on your own. If you want to hire a third party to come in and do that, that's fine, but you're not, there's no one from the government that's coming in and doing that for you. However, there are going to be a small subset of companies who will be designated as medium and high assessment requirements. Those companies will actually have the DFARS, the 800-171 assessments performed by somebody from the government. So the government will actually be doing those assessments on behalf of that customer. And this will be for higher profile contracts, probably higher dollar amount contracts. But again, I think the basic amount, there's going to be 24,000 manufacturers who are going to have to do basic to a couple hundred for medium and high. So it's still the vast majority of companies are going to need to meet the basic assessment, and the process isn't going to change all that much. The one thing that is going to change is that companies that are doing a basic assessment are now going to have to report to a supplier performance risk system, or SPRS. So in the past, the actual reporting and the self-attestation that you were meeting the 800-171 requirements, that was kind of handled on an individual contractor by contractor basis. This is actually going to be a system that you're going to be putting this information into when you do that assessment process. Again, whether it's a self-assessment or it's a report that's been helped to be developed by a third-party organization, you're actually going to be required to register in this supplier performance risk system, and then you're going to have a score basically determining how many of the 800-171 items you're meeting. Now, it's worth noting that there's no qualifying or disqualifying scores, so it's not like you need to have a score of X or higher. You're still looking to have either a security plan or a plan of action in place, and that will qualify you for these DFARS clause related contracts. But companies vary from what they require. So a private contractor who sees somebody who has a bid in with a supplier score of 80 versus a supplier score of 40, that may sway them in terms of who they actually go with in terms of awarding them that contract, but there isn't actually any specific qualifying or disqualifying score as far as that goes. Also, when you go through this reporting process to the SPRS, the assessment submission is valid for 3 years, so you don't need to resubmit that. If you have had one within the prior 3 years, it will be valid for that period of time. It's also worth mentioning that this is in place for new contracts. It's not in place for any existing contracts. This is actually a new clause that is going to be added in the future. So if you have an existing contract with the government, for the duration of that contract, it is still going to be the process that you have been using previously, which is just interaction with that contractor directly. You won't have to use this SPRS system. Nothing's going to change for you until new contracts come through and you're bidding on new contracts in the future. And then the thing at the end of the road that the Department of Defense is looking at currently is CMMC. So this is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And as I mentioned before, with things like ISO and AS9100, this is actually going to be an audited and certified standard. So you will have to go to a marketplace, hire an auditor to come in, go through the CMMC and actually give you a certification. And depending on the contract, it will have varying levels of certification that you might be required to do. And those certifications are levels 1 through 5. All DoD contractors, regardless of whether or not they have CUI, will need to have some sort of level of certification. And these contracts, again, this is for new contracts. It's not for anything existing. It's a new clause that's going to be added in. These CMMC requirements will be gradually phased into contracts over the next 5 years. And then after 5 years is when everybody is going to have to have some sort of level of CMMC certification. So again, if you have an existing contract you're worried about, it doesn't apply to this. It only applies to new contracts, and if a contract expires upon renewal of that contract, this clause might get added in. Now, if you're thinking about what level you're going to need to be, just to give you a bit of a heads up, all CUI containing contracts, so anybody who's required to meet the 800-171 requirements, are going to need to require CMMC level 3 certification. And CMMC level 3 is all of the 800-171 requirements plus 20 additional items. And again, this is a certification process that has to be awarded via official auditing. A self-assessment is not going to be sufficient. So this is something that you're going to want to plan to prepare for in the coming years. If you are meeting the 800-171 requirements currently, it's going to be a very small jump to get from there to CMMC level 3. The 20 additional items are not particularly complex or any more difficult than the 800-171 itself. So if you're gearing yourself towards 800-171 compliance, you are going to be in a very solid position to meet CMMC level 3 requirements within the next 5 years, as they are going to be required for you. And for new contracts, they actually have to specifically submit a request to have CMMC certification included in that contract. So it isn't like everyone going forward is going to include a certification requirement. It's actually going to have to be permission based, because the CMMC accreditation body is just in the process of training and certifying auditors now. So they need to kind of coordinate that rollout of requirements with auditors so they have enough people to fill the demand. So again, this is not something that you have to concern yourself with today in terms of the short term. You still need to meet 800-171 requirements. That is likely going to be the case for you for at least a number of years, 2, 3, up to 5. But afterwards, that is going to be a requirement for you. And it is something that you should start thinking about immediately, just to make sure that you're positioned to meet those requirements, because in the future, that plan of action that we talked about isn't going to apply. You are going to have to meet all of these requirements in order to bid on a contract. So you want to be prepared for when that day comes. A little bit talking more about how to become certified in CMMC. So again, the accreditation body is going to train and accredit auditors and assessors. There's going to be a specific marketplace that is going to have approved assessors, and then companies can select the approved vendor for the CMMC assessment at the specific level they're looking for. So if they are looking for a level 2 auditor, then you can check out all the level 2 auditors in your area, level 3, level 4, and so on. What the cost of assessment and implementation is going to be for this process is going to vary based on the level that you're going to be required to certify at. So again, if you're required to certify at level 1, it's going to be extremely basic for you, probably not going to be much of a cost involved at all. If you're required to do level 3 and you're not prepared, or if you're one of the very few that's going to have to require level 4 or level 5, there could be a considerable cost. But again, pretty much everybody is going to max out around level 3. Some of the possible implementation costs you might be looking at is equipment, software, contracting to actually put these things into place. Those are all things that you may need to plan for. Some of the implementation might be more of a time investment. So it could be things like policy writing, employee training, configuring existing systems that you might have. Managed services, so hiring a company to do some of these things and go through some of these processes for you and monitor your activity in your network constantly 24/7. They will be more convenient and will help you to meet these things easier, but it is going to come at an additional cost. However, it is worth noting that reimbursement mechanisms may be available via grants or other assistance. Again, the government is very aware that companies may need help in meeting these requirements and getting these certifications. So there are going to be grants that are going to be available for those as well in the future as these certifications become actual requirements for contracts. Okay, and as always, we have more information that's available for you at the cohort registration. If you are interested in applying for either the cybersecurity assistance grants or the self-assessment portion, the online teaching course, you can do that at the cohort registration. And we do have future webinars coming up that were mentioned earlier. If you want to register for those, you can go to that link for the NewYorkMEP.org cybersecurity webinar registration. The next one is going to be November 21st. 24th that is going to be discussing enemies and attacks. So taking a little bit of a look at the people who are trying to do us harm, why, how, getting more into the nitty-gritty of who you might need to look out for. And to end things off, we are going to go ahead and have another poll question here. And that poll question is going to be, what are you the most concerned about regarding 800-171 security guidelines? Are you concerned about IT infrastructure, so internal activities or application security, policies and training or lack thereof in certain cases, the physical security of your company, buildings, servers, the data center, or network security, so external communications, information going out and coming into your company? What do you feel is going to be the toughest hurdle for you to get over in terms of meeting these security guidelines? And I'll go ahead and we'll leave that up for about 30 seconds or so. Okay, and Corey, when you get a chance, if you could just go ahead and read off the results of that poll to me.
Sure, Paul. 31% said IT infrastructure. An identical 31% said policies and training, lack of. 8% responded physical security, and another 31% responded network security, external communications.
So it was split. It was split right down the middle between 3 different areas, and that's pretty close to what I've seen in going through and doing these assessments. Typically, most of the companies, when I actually go in the door, tend to not have a lot of existing policies or employee training programs in place. So that is where a lot of them need that. But then there is certainly issues as far as the infrastructure as well and the network security, especially if they are a company that has machinery that is connected to their network, because attacks on those can be particularly brutal, because if a machine gets brought down, that can really hurt productivity. So those are all, solid concerns. Physical security is also an element sometimes, but again, those 3, and it's funny how split they were, are definitely things to be considered. But in the vast majority of the places I've gone to, companies have actually done very well in managing and remediating all of those areas and doing what they need to meet the requirements. So again, scary prospect to look at from the outside in, but once you actually go through the process and you have somebody assisting you, if you're not really equipped to handle it yourself, it becomes much more manageable than you initially think. And that's a lot of times the feedback that I get from companies that we work with, is that I thought this was going to be a lot harder. I was a lot more worried about it. It's worth noting, and I just went through a presentation by Katie Arrington, who is the CISO at the Department of Defense, the Chief Information Security Officer. And one of the things that she said that stood out to me was that the Department of Defense can't make anything. They can't do any manufacturing on their own. So they rely on all of you, all of the supply chain manufacturers, to do what they need done. So they are not interested in any way, shape, or form in locking anybody out or preventing them from making what they need made for them. So the Department of Defense is not going to look to throw a wall in front of you that you cannot overcome. They're making sure that you're doing everything within reason that you can to protect the information you're handling, and that you're doing so responsibly. So that is something that hopefully puts some of your minds at ease. And with that being said, let's go ahead and open the floor to some questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Great presentation as usual. Questions are starting to roll in here, folks. And again, once as a reminder here, control panel under questions. We have about 15, 16 minutes here, so please send us your questions and we'll address them accordingly. Paul, as the questions are rolling in here, I think I'll start with the first one with you here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
An individual, unfortunately, tuned in a couple minutes late. Can you please go through the portion of the online training which is currently available? You had mentioned that the introductory sessions of the self-assessment tools through Teachable, they're available at this time. How can these individuals or companies that are joining the cohort, how will they receive these self-assessment tools?
Okay, so for the self-assessment portion, once you sign up for the cohort, probably within the next day or so, you'll be receiving an invitation to enroll in the course. The platform that the course is going to be done through is through an online training platform called Teachable. If you've ever done any sort of online training or online college work or anything like that, it's going to be very familiar to you. It's got a very nice layout. It's very intuitive. And what is going to happen is that when you register and enroll in that, you are going to be presented with modules that are going to take you through each of the sections of the 800-171. What is available currently, if you were to sign up today, is the introductory module, which is going to, again, provide you with information on what the 800-171 is, introduce you to some of the resources and tools that you'll be using to go through the self-assessment process. So that's available to you immediately. And also the first module, which is covering the access control family, item 3.1 in the 800-171. It is covering that entire family. That entire family is 22 items long, which is actually a fifth of the entire 800-171. They kind of front load all the important stuff right away and then kind of spread the rest out throughout the document. So currently there's about an hour and a half worth of video lecture. There is a, I believe, 8-question quiz at the end of that module as well to help you kind of grasp some of the concepts that you're going to be learning during that training portion. And then on a weekly schedule, I believe they're set to release every Wednesday from here forward, starting with November 4th and then going through, I think, the December 16th, like right before Christmas. We'll be releasing 1 or 2 new modules every single week, so you can kind of pace yourself, spread things out, and then before the Christmas break, if you've been following along, you'll have your entire 800-171 self-assessment done. There's a worksheet that you'll be filling out along with the lectures, so you can really just kind of take it step by step, and then once you're done, then you'll have that process completed. So again, introductory module and the module covering the first family are up right now. If you register today, you'll be getting that enrollment email within the next day or so, and then you'll be off to the races.
Thanks, Paul. Everton, here's a question for you, if you don't mind addressing, and I can certainly help out as well here. We have an individual that signed up and sent in an application for the cohort. And I know recently we made a fine implementation of a automated response, which is embedded inside of the application process now. Could you mention or talk about briefly what that process is from the time that an organization submits the application to join the cohort, and how and when are they made aware of the status of their application for the cohort?
Certainly, Corey. So once the application is submitted, we are notified of the application, and that goes in front of an approval committee. We have 5 of us, so we sit together, we review the application, make sure that the company indeed qualifies. And once that's done, then, and we usually have this meeting once a week on a Monday. And once this is done, we then instruct, I think Paul Laporte is the person who will be sending the letters out on behalf of Corey and myself. And we immediately send a letter out to notify the company that you are either a member of the cohort, or if in the case, if you satisfy the other requirements for the grant, whether or not you'll be eligible for that grant. So I would say that within 2 weeks, you should have all the information you need, assuming no significant problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul, here's a question for you. If I outsource IT, are there any additional considerations or concerns? And then a second part to that question is, or does that change the way that I need to become compliant?
So if you're outsourcing your IT with an outside contractor, which is done by, I would say, probably the majority of companies I work with, the only other considerations that you need to think about are if that IT company is storing any information that is considered CUI within their offices. So if their server, if your server is like hosted within their facilities or something like that, they would need to meet the 800-171 requirements as well. Also, if they're doing any sort of remote desktop work, so they're doing like remote maintenance with your company, they would need to meet the portions of the 800-171 for remote access. Specifically, they would need multi-factor authentication enabled, which again, we talk about in the training section. So there are some additional considerations to give, but if they're not hosting anything specifically of yours, if they're really just kind of coming in and doing work as needed, then they can really be just treated like another member of your staff, essentially. It's just that if they're doing any sort of additional remote work, which a lot of maintenance contractors do, then you would have to consider that as well. So it complicates things slightly, but it's not, it doesn't really add on a whole heap of other extra problems.
Okay, thanks, Paul. One more question here. Once CMMC certification is given, does it expire? And how often do I need to get recertified?
3 years again. So CMMC, that's going to be 3 years as well. So when the new clauses come through with like the SPRS and the 800-171, that'll be 3 years. And then when you certify for the CMMC, that is going to be valid for 3 years as well. So if you do that, you do it once, and then every 3 years you'll have to reassess. And then that, if you wanted to change levels or something at that point or go a level up, you could consider that, but that's what it's going to be, 3 years.
Okay, folks, we have about 8 minutes left. If anybody has any final questions, we'd be willing to accept them and address them at this time. Paul, earlier in the presentation, you spoke a lot about performing the on-site assessments and your experience over 5 years working with the small to mid-sized manufacturers. In your opinion, and it was briefly touched on in one of the survey questions that we had at the registrants, from your experience across the state in the more than 100 small to mid-sized manufacturers, which you've gone and assessed their cybersecurity and network requirements, what are the most common areas that you feel that the organizations, as it relates to the DFARS requirement, where are they falling short? And where is the common ground that you're finding from these companies?
So most of the time when I go through and do assessments, again, like kind of referring back to that survey, a lot of people think that the issue is going to be specifically in their IT infrastructure. So, the machines they have or how their server, their network is set up. And yeah, maybe there's some issues there, but most of the time when I go into a place, they don't have any policies or they don't have any formal training for their employees, which is, it sounds bad on the surface, but the reality is that a lot of companies are small businesses and everybody kind of basically knows what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. It's just nothing's written down because it probably doesn't need to be because everybody's been there for a while. They know the rules already, but nothing's outlined. So the problem with that is that if something does go wrong and some information does get lost, damaged, stolen, that belongs to the DoD, and they come in and go, okay, what were you doing? Then they say, okay, well, this person knows not to share the information this way. Well, where's that written down? And if you don't have that evidence for them, then it's going to be very difficult for them to believe that you were doing all the work you should. So really, the majority of what I see when I go into places is just kind of formalizing things a little bit more. It's making sure that there is actual ground rules that are written down, put into place that everybody understands and everyone knows to follow. And then in that process, that is usually where you figure out, oh, okay, we need to change our IT infrastructure in this way, or we need to make sure people are using these tools that we're giving them to protect things. So people think it's one thing usually when I go in, but the vast majority of the time, it's usually human resources related things, policies, procedures, proper training of employees. That's really what's going to give you the most bang for the buck too, because cybersecurity is really just making sure that people are aware of what they're handling and know how to handle it properly.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Here's a question coming in. Is SPRC up and running now? And if not, when will it be?
SPRS, yes, it is up and running. I don't know if you can register for it if you're not designated. I'm not exactly sure how that registration process works because I'm not a manufacturer. I can't register on behalf of it. But that system is up and going because I think it had been used for some contractors or some supply chain people in the DoD were using it already as kind of an informal tool. Now it's going to be more of an official thing. But if you go ahead and do the research, if you do some searching for SPRS, you can find information for that. As far as registering, I don't know if you can register unless you've actually been given clearance on like a contract that you're bidding on or working for.
Paul, as far as more information and researching SPRS, where could they find that information? Do you have any further guidance offhand here that we could report on?
So going back into the earlier interim rule, I mentioned the DFARs rule. If people go and look that up, and I'll go ahead and I'll go back to that slide so you can get the number of that. Where was it here? That's the DFARS clause. So I'm just going to try and find that follow-up steps. So DFARS case 2019-D041. If you go ahead and just do a search from that, the National Register actually put out the rule for that. You can find all that documentation there that has the additional information. So I would start with that, and then that'll have other resources for you that you can follow as well.
Okay. And then Everton, a question for you, if we can. As mentioned in the presentation, along with the 5 webinars, there's also 3 workshops across the state, and one of those workshops is actually tomorrow in Rome. Could you talk very briefly about that opportunity for everybody tomorrow?
Yes, so we would love to have you join us. Tomorrow we will be having a live workshop at the MVCC campus in Rome, New York. We'll be having an early breakfast that morning, followed by our keynote speaker. And our keynote speaker will be from AIS, and followed by that, we will have Jake Mahivik, who will be speaking, and our very own Paul Laporte will also be talking. And we will then have a panel of speakers, and the panelists will include the speakers and, of course, Corey Albrecht. I'll be moderating that. And after that, we'll talk a little bit more about how we developed this program, and followed by a box lunch. Want to remind everyone that all the safety protocols that are in place, would like you to adhere to that, would include mask in campus, etc., and social distancing. We'll be following the SUNY guidelines for that. So we encourage you to come and listen to this live workshop and be able to participate in all the activities. I mean, you will learn all the areas about not only the grant program, but what it means to work towards the equivalent of CMMC level 3. Thank you.
Thanks, Everton. And this might be our final question for the morning. Regarding the workshop tomorrow, is there any charge for the event? And how might an attendee this morning register for the event?
All right, so there's no charge for the event. And right now you can still register by going to, so let's see, Paul, okay, yes, so there it is on the webinar series. Paul has the link up that you can see that. And you could go to that link at the FuseHub website, and you can still register. So looking forward to seeing you there. Corey, I should mention also that we have 2 additional workshops coming up. We will have a live one at the RIT campus in Rochester, and that's going to be December 9th. And November 18th, we plan to have another workshop. And right now we're thinking that that one may possibly be remote. If not, it will be live in Long Island.
Great. Thank you, Everton.
You're welcome.
Well, folks, I believe that does conclude our program for this morning. I'd like to thank our webinar speakers, Paul Laporte and Everton. And on behalf of Mohawk Valley Community College, the Advanced Institute for Manufacturing, FuseHub, and our grant partners, Empire State Development, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in this morning. And hope all is well, stay safe, and we will see you next time on November 24th for the 3rd part of our 5-part webinar series. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bert. Okay, bye.